My name is Rosie Wylie. I am from Historic Environment Scotland and will be your chair for the day. On behalf of the organising committee, I want to say a big thank you to all our speakers and panel members, and of course also to all of you who have signed up to attend and be part of this knowledge share and discussion today. Today is being recorded, so please note that if you contribute to either the discussions or in the open session or via the chat bar, it will be shared and be publicly available in the future. Please turn off your camera if you do not want to appear on screen. So please get in touch if you have any questions about this recording, or if you have contributed and you have a change of heart after the event, please just let us know. I'll start off by saying that today we are joined by BSL interpreters Lisa Humphrey and Jill Gallacher. If you would like BSL interpretation throughout the event, then simply right-click on the interpreter and select Pin. This will keep them visible at all times, and we have also pinned them to the main screen ourselves. Jill will be on screen first for around the first 20 minutes and will then switch to Lisa. These instructions have also been added to the chat bar. So, I can't believe it's nearly the end of May already. It's great to see the progress being made with our current situation and to hear about activity starting up and plans for volunteering resuming. But for now, we are still here in our Zoom room for events today discussing safely welcoming back our volunteers. This event is brought to you by a partnership between Make Your Mark and the Heritage Volunteering Group and is hosted by Historic Environment Scotland's Community Connections Forum, a collaboration of organisations coming together who all share the same aspiration of supporting volunteer involving organisations and championing an excellent and inclusive volunteer experience. The Make Your Mark campaign aims to increase the number and diversity of heritage volunteers in Scotland. Our goal is to encourage heritage sector to take the lead on inclusive volunteering practices and experiences. And I'm going to tell you more about Make Your Mark as we go on through the day and you can find out more about how you can get involved. We currently have 38 organisations signed up, and I really hope some are here today. And as I say, I'll tell you more at the end of the session. The Heritage Volunteering Group, or HVG as it's known, was set up in 2014 and exists to promote volunteering, champion best practice, and connect practitioners in heritage volunteering across the UK. Again, we'll hear more about HVG and how you can get involved as this session progresses. So I just want to run through a couple of housekeeping rules before we welcome our first speaker. We're in a Zoom meeting format, which will hopefully enable you to fully participate in the chat and discussion. Please do keep your mics off unless you're speaking and cameras off if that improves your connection. And hopefully this will help us ensure we have a smooth running order for today. We're going to be doing some live polling to ask your thoughts on how we should plan future events. At the break, we will also have optional chat rooms. Just like a physical conference, if you want to, you'll be able to catch up with some friends, someone in particular for networking, or just have a general chat with like-minded volunteer enthusiasts. After each talk, we'll have a live question and answer session. You can use the chat feature, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, to pose your questions or comments, which will be picked up by Amy Mack, who is a member of the event team. Please start your question with a Q so that Amy can easily identify it as a question to be asked. These instructions will also be added to the chat bar. We're also going to have a panel question at the end, so please do feel free to save up any questions if you would rather save them for a live panel rather than specifically to those speakers. Now, I don't think I need to say this, but can you all please be kind and respectful when you ask your questions or take part in the discussion? We really want to make sure that this is a friendly and inclusive event that attracts you to attend again. We are, of course, tweeting today. Our event hashtag is hashtag #MakeYourMarkScot, again, added to the chat bar. So please do tweet away. We're going to pass on to the first speakers now. So I will now introduce the Friends of Dundonald Castle and David Bell from the National Mining Museum, who will both be talking about their experiences of re-engaging volunteers after lockdown 1 and the lessons they have learnt from this. We couldn't be joined in person today by the Friends of Dundonald Castle, as they currently need to be on site to welcome back visitors to Dundonald Castle. So they have kindly sent us a video to share instead. Historic Environment Scotland have worked in partnership with the Friends of Dundonald for many years, and they were one of the first groups who came to mind when we thought about examples of sharing volunteering good practice. The Friends of Dundonald Castle video, it's slightly quiet, so please just take a second now to turn the volume on your own PC right up. We've turned it up at our end, but as I say, you might just need to turn it up at your end. So I'll pass over to Rosie B, our tech extraordinaire, who is going to press play. Thank you, Rosie.
Hi, I'm Anne and I'm the chairperson of Friends of Dundonald Castle, which you can see in the background. I'm very happy to speak to you about how we have managed to keep our volunteers over lockdown, and we have been truly blessed with their enthusiasm and their keenness to come back. I have to say that the team has been kept well informed all through this horrible year by Zoom calls. We've had quiz nights, we've had talks, monthly talks, lots of Friday emails every Friday to keep in touch, and everybody has contributed in some way or another. It's been, I have to say, it's been very humbling the way everybody has come on board and been keen to come back. PPE, all the provision we've put in place has been very carefully laid out, and everybody has said how safe they feel coming back, both staff and our visitors who are coming back now. Even during lockdown, we have a lot of people who are regulars who needed a bit of extra support, and they have come to us looking for help and just a wee chat sometimes, and just to know that we're still there and when we were opening again as well. So yes, we have been very lucky indeed.
Hi, I'm Dave. I'm one of the tour guides here. The way we kept in touch over the lockdown really was regular emails from the guys in the management. So every Friday we have an update just to let us know how things are going on. We had quiz night, so everybody gets together on Zoom. So although we don't get to see people physically, we still get to keep in touch with them and see how they're doing. We were involved, some of us were involved in putting together blogs and some podcasts as well, so just reaching out to other people, and that way we sort of kept in touch really, so we were all kept in the loop there. And I really was looking forward to coming back really. I feel nice and safe here because I know the cleaning that we do the cleaning every morning before we open up, and we do the cleaning between the tours as well. Everybody who comes in, they'll get a like a health and safety brief as well, so we tell them exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, what to expect from them. We've got routes that we take through the castle, so if there's more than one tour guide on, we deconflict with the other group as well, so everybody is kept separate and everybody's nice and safe. And then last thing at night, we did the place a thorough clean again, so even though we were cleaning first thing in the morning, everything is super clean in the morning, so it's really nice and safe. I just love being back here. I love showing people about the castle. It's a bit of a surprise to people because there's much more really than they expect, and then we will try and bring the castle to life for them. So that's what I really missed when we were shut.
Right, my name is Frank and I'm a tour guide at Dundonald Castle. I enjoy it very much. I've been here since just after Christmas 2020 until March, until lockdown, and then came back again in August, and there was another lockdown, and then came back again in April, and it's great to be back and thoroughly enjoy it. Enjoy taking people around the castle and enjoy the company as well. Much enjoyable.
How did you feel about the team's communication throughout the lockdown periods?
Very good. Yes, I was always kept informed. We also got the Friday funnies as well, so they were quite good as well. Enjoyed that, and it did help as well during lockdown, give me something to look forward to in the dark days, as we might say. And but we were still here, so yeah, onwards and upwards, I hope.
What was it that encouraged you to come back to work and volunteer for the Friends of Dundonald Castle after the lockdown?
I was looking forward to it so much, so I just said, well, just keep going.
Is there any aspects of it that made it a little bit easier for you, like training or any other aspects you can think of?
Not really. The training has been very good, especially on the internet, especially with PPE and things like that. That's quite difficult, but I think on the whole, most people who come to the castle will always introduce them who I am and give them the PPE guide and take it from there.
Excellent, thanks Frank.
Great, thank you very much for sharing that video, Rosie. So a couple of things that I've jotted down there, certainly that I'd like to have this part of this wider discussion when we move on to the panel, is a reflection there about hearing the volunteers who they really wanted to be part of planning the health and safety measures that they would then be delivering as part of their tours. And I think that's something really important to reflect on about getting volunteers involved from the very start. Friday Funnies, I'd love to hear more about the Friday Funnies, and I'd love to hear more ideas from people in this session about activities that you've done to keep your volunteers engaged while they can't physically do it, and hearing there that those weekly comms kept one of the volunteers giving them something to look forward to and hope for the volunteering resuming. So I think that it would be great to have a bit more discussion around about that later on. So I'm going to introduce David Bell now. So David is with us live today, and he'll be talking to his slides. David has been with the National Mining Museum for 7 years, and prior to that supported volunteering in a range of heritage volunteer involving organisations. And we also work with David through his representation on the Make Your Mark Volunteer Organisers Network. So I'll pass over to David.
Okay, well, I'm just going to make a start. Greetings from cloudy Edinburgh. As Rosie said, my name's David Bell. I am the Assistant Curator at the National Mining Museums Scotland, and I'm also part of the Volunteer Organisers Network. Today, I'm going to describe to you the Mining Museum's experience through the lockdown.
Sorry, David, can I just say, David, we can't see your screen. Were you sharing any slides? Because Rosie can share it from her end if you've got any issue with screen sharing at the moment.
I was going to bring the slides in a little bit later.
Sorry, I'm being impatient. No, sorry, no. Carry on. Just ignore me.
Desperate for my face to go away. I know. Right. So today I'm going to describe the Mining Museum's experience through the lockdown in relation to our volunteers. And then I'll spend a little bit of time looking at the lessons that we've learned so far. And I think so far is important. I think it'd be really interesting if we did a similar sort of event in about 6 months' time. I think there's a lot of learning to come. Anyway, I'm now going to share my screen. You're going to go back to the beginning. There we go. Okay. A little bit of context. The National Mining Museum Scotland is located at the site of the former Lady Victoria Colliery in the village of Newton Grange, which is about 8 miles south of Edinburgh. We have around 20 full and part-time staff, and prior to lockdown, we had 28 volunteers. All of our volunteers work behind the scenes, so we have no public-facing volunteers at the moment. And although a small number of our volunteers work with the facilities team, so looking at estate management, the majority of volunteers are in our collections department. Most of the tasks that they carry out are computer-based. So they are accessioning objects, they are updating records. We're currently updating our library records with a view in the future to making them available online. and they also respond to inquiries from the public. And I ought to say, when this slide's up, we have a lot more than just miners' lamps. We have an enormous collection ranging from domestic items from miners' communities to huge coal cutters, etc. Anyway, I'm going to take you back now to March 2020. I'm sure none of you want to be there, but there we are. On the advice of the Scottish Government, we asked our volunteers to stop attending the museum 1 week before the UK national lockdown was announced. From lockdown, I worked from home for 3 weeks and was then furloughed from mid-April to mid-August. On returning to work, which again was from home, I contacted our volunteers. For some volunteers, circumstances had changed. 2 of them had found employment. 2 of them had decided to start master's degrees and didn't feel that they'd have the time to volunteer anymore. And very sadly, 1 volunteer had passed away. And indeed, another passed away in February of this year. It seems wildly optimistic thinking now, but at that time, with COVID numbers falling away and the museum having opened in August using a new booking system, we were considering the possibility of volunteers returning to the museum in October. Broaching the subject with them over the summer gave us a range of responses. And I think that the first one speaks for itself. Approximately 50% of our volunteers were asking that question. When can we start? Very, very keen, very eager to get involved again with the museum. There were a couple of volunteers who had issues around shielding. They were either shielding themselves or they were living in a household with somebody who was shielding. So understandably, they were a lot more cautious about going out and about in the world again. And also, and I'm sure this is fairly common, that there were some volunteers that relied on public transport to get to and from the museum, and their attitude was that they were not comfortable using public transport at that point. So my manager and myself looked at next steps. I've already said that a group of volunteers were very keen, and we found that several of these volunteers were positive about doing some work from home. The nature of the tasks our volunteers carry out meant that without being able to work on site with the collection, options were limited. However, there was an ongoing project to record items relating to Scotland from a long-running coal industry magazine. The task required reading through the magazine and recording information onto a spreadsheet. 4 of our volunteers became involved, either collecting volumes from the magazine or having them dropped off to their homes by myself. The project progressed far quicker than previously, and the information gleaned has already helped in research inquiries. In addition to this project, we also had a few volunteers working in other areas. One, originally from the Larkhall area of Glasgow, embarked on researching the mining history of that area. Another, a talented artist, has been able to continue producing work to support our education officer. And finally, one volunteer who had been helping organise our collection of maps and plans started to record digital images of them from home. Bubbling away in the background were research inquiries from the public. Inquiries take up a large part of our time, and their numbers increased throughout 2020. I would regularly forward these to volunteers who had knowledge and expertise in specific areas. So moving to the present, we plan to reopen the museum to the public soon and hopefully welcome back our volunteers in early July. I asked volunteers what they felt should be in place for them to be comfortable returning. Although my focus in asking that question was on enough space, PPE, and those sort of practicalities, the responses were exclusively on an emotional level, with the general view being, I won't know until I walk through the door and start work. So, lessons learned. I've just mentioned a typical volunteer response of not knowing how they would feel about being back until they try it. Be aware that a volunteer may come in and an hour later decide that it's too soon for them. We need to support volunteers to return in ways that make them feel safe, and this will be different for everyone. In terms of flexibility, we've also been required to be flexible in terms of work planning. Tasks that would normally be prioritised but were undoable from home had to be put to one side, and lower priority projects that could be achieved took their place. Learning that working from home is a possibility for some volunteers was very helpful here. Don't forget the fun part. People volunteer for all sorts of reasons, but the social aspect is usually a factor. Our volunteers come in 1 day a week, so they only get to know the other volunteers that are also in on that day. The museum would usually have a Christmas quiz and tea, a day out, a summer barbecue, and maybe 2 or 3 other social gatherings in the course of the year, in part so that all of our volunteers can meet all the other volunteers. Make sure that on your return, these social events are still organised. They're not an add-on, but they're an important part of the volunteer offer. And finally, volunteers rely on the support of staff, and staff rely on the contribution of their volunteers. Throughout this past year, some people have managed comfortably, while others have really struggled. Returning to the workplace for both volunteers and staff will be a process involving feelings of relief, anxiety, moving forward, and also a step into the unknown. We'll all need to look out for each other, and we'll all need to check on each other's well-being. Okay, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, David. That was really great. Thank you so much for sharing those learning, that learning with us. And I think the thing that really chimes there with all of us is saying that, you know, your volunteers had an emotional response there. I won't know until I'm back until I try it, and be flexible and really involve them is such a key point. I have a question to start off the discussion here. Have you found, David, that any of your volunteers have said to you that because of the time that they've had away from volunteering, that they've had a bit of a change of heart, or realised that volunteering maybe isn't the priority it was, and that they've discovered other things or have other priorities and aren't coming back? Because a few people I've spoken to, that's some of the feedback that they've been getting recently. So I'd be interested to hear about any sort of changes in circumstance.
Yeah, well, as I said in the talk, there are a couple of volunteers who took the opportunity to explore and then to start their master's degrees. And there were 2 that had already been looking for employment. So it was a really positive thing that they'd found employment, and hopefully their volunteering with us helped in that way. But apart from that, it's been those ones that are really, really keen to get back and get involved. And that's been really heartening, because I knew that our group of volunteers were committed to the museum. A lot of them are long-time volunteers with the museum, but it was to have that sort of confirmed by this unpleasant situation that we've all had to go through, but the fact that they've been really keen to want to get back and want to get involved in any way has been really positive.
Okay, thank you. So I'll pass over to Amy Mack now, if there's any questions coming through the chat.
So we've got a comment from Amy, which just reflects and picks up on what you were just talking about in terms of different circumstances. So she's noticed a range and sort of trend in terms of some volunteers wanting to return and some just not coming through. So I wonder if that is a commonality in terms of people's different circumstances. And I thought it was interesting as well that, you know, the different setting, you know, if the Friends of Dundonald, they don't have that ability to have that sort of online collections engagement, David, that you've had. So there's sort of different opportunities in the different settings, which will make quite a big difference. One thing I was wondering about was how important, again, picking up on what the Friends of Dundonald said, that health and safety, making people feel comfortable, you know, was that a really big focus for you, David, in terms of, yeah, sort of how you adapted and made sure that, you know, PPE was in place were required, etc. Did you get that feedback from volunteers that that was a really key thing?
Yeah, it was mentioned. I think just to give you a bit of context from our museum's point of view, we have a facilities manager, and throughout the pandemic, they have been the person that had been collecting the information, going to Scottish Government meetings to find out more about the law and the guidance, etc. And then that's been fed back to the management team. As I said, our volunteers haven't returned to the museum yet, and most of our staff are still working from home. But if ever I do pop in, I see that there's lots of sanitizer, there's lots of face masks. The last time I was in, there were some screens being put up. So it's certainly an issue for our volunteers, and I think one of the interesting things is communicating with our volunteers over the past year. You start, and I'm sure this is true for everybody, but you start to be far more aware of individuals' levels of anxiety, their attitude to risk taking, etc. And I'm really conscious of that it is going to be a bit of a step into the unknown for some of our volunteers coming back into the office. And I think it's just really important to keep the communication going, to keep, you know, to ask if they're all right, to ask if they're comfortable, to ask if there's any other changes we could make that would make them more comfortable. We're quite fortunate, I have to say, that we've got our office and archive and library are in a large Victorian, originally a school. So we've got quite a lot of big rooms, we've got tall ceilings, we've got lots and lots of windows, so ventilation is not going to be an issue. And like I said, we have a facilities manager who's sort of on the case. So I'm feeling pretty confident that we can manage it.
Okay, great, thank you. And that brings us swiftly on to time.
It'll be so interesting, won't it, going forward?
Oh, you're right.
Sorry, I was just going to say it will be really interesting going forward how people's feelings change this year with the vaccine rollout and how everyone's feeling. We've got a question from Sarah Pierce, who's going to ask her question directly. Sarah, wherever you are.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about returning to having in-person events again, because we're trying to kind of get a feel. All of our attendees are usually volunteers from different heritage organisations, and I think the answer is probably going to be mixed. But yeah, David, I didn't know whether you had any feeling about how people felt about coming back and actually being in person in a space together to learn and share and have that kind of camaraderie.
In terms of sort of one-off events at the museum itself for the public?
Any kind of in-person events where people are gathering. So yeah, that could be it.
Yeah, I think it's I was thinking about that in terms of the social aspect of volunteering. That, you know, we've got a tradition that a lot of organisations will have of all coming together for our morning coffee and for our afternoon tea. And unless it's a lovely sunny day and we get some chairs outside, we're not going to be able to do that so much. And also we're going to hopefully be able to shuffle our volunteer timetable around so that we don't have as many people in on specific days as we normally would have. You know, Thursdays were particularly busy. So yeah, in terms of volunteering, that social aspect, I think, and with groups is going to be a bit of a loss, and it's going to be a while till we can get that back, I think.
Great. We've got loads of comments, but it's probably time to move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And everyone, just please do save up any questions for the discussion session after the last speaker. Great, thank you so much, David, and Friends of Dundonald Castle, although they cannot be here. Hopefully they'll see a thank you in this recording. So next up, we have Joe Sellors and Vanessa Theed. And Joe and Vanessa will be talking about approaches to planning for volunteer re-engagement, and will be sharing resources that can be adapted and used by yourselves and organisations if that is any help. Joe has worked with Historic Environment Scotland for 5.5 years. Joe's involved with a range of engagement work and has been involved with shaping our volunteer programme, both locally at Dumbarton Castle and nationally through supporting the development of our re-engagement approach that he's going to be talking about. Joe also represents HES on the Make Your Mark Volunteer Organisers Network. Vanessa's worked in volunteer management for the last 15 years. The last 7 have been with the heritage sector, and she's vice chair of the Heritage Volunteering Group, as well as vice chair to the London Heritage Volunteering Group. And her day job is volunteer and apprenticeship strategy manager at the National History Museum. So I'll pass over to Joe.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen, so just let me know when you can see.
Yep, we can see that now. Thanks, Joe.
You can see that? Good. Yep. So yeah, I'm Joseph Sellors. I'm a tourism destination development manager covering the Lothians and West region for Historic Environment Scotland. It's a very varied role, covers a number of topics, one of which is supporting the volunteer programme. And as Rosie mentioned, I also represent Historic Environment Scotland on the Make Your Mark Volunteer Organisers Network. In terms of Historic Environment Scotland itself, it is the lead public body set up to investigate, care for and promote Scotland's historic environment, and cares for over 300 properties. So, in terms of the volunteer programme, we offer roles in areas such as archives, sites, event volunteering, the Ranger Service, archaeological digs, and collaborative projects like the #Historic Scot Youth Forum. This year we were successful in gaining the Investing in Volunteers accreditation, and as well as our own volunteer programme, we are core partners in the Make Your Mark campaign through participation in the Our Place in Time volunteering group. In the year before the pandemic, Historic Environment Scotland interacted with 900 volunteers who contributed the equivalent of 1,682 days of their time. In contrast, last year, we only had 28 volunteers who volunteered remotely and contributed 498 hours, so it was quite a big difference. At the start of the lockdown last year, similar to the National Mining Museum, all our volunteers that couldn't do so remotely, and all our volunteering was put on hold. We did receive the green light to bring back volunteers at the end of last year. Then the second wave hit and plans were again put back on hold. But Historic Environment Scotland takes a national perspective, linking in with our minimum operating standards, which we'll be discussing a little bit more shortly. And we also have a COVID continuity and COVID resumption groups with all decisions taken on a national level. So, because of what we've just mentioned, our volunteer programme is still on hold, but we are eager to re-engage as soon as we are able to. And we have maintained contact with our volunteers throughout, through regular newsletters, and we hosted the first Historic Environment Scotland volunteer social event back in March, where we ran our plans for re-engagement past volunteers who attended the social quiz. So we're about to share those plans with you, but when we ran them past volunteers who attended the quiz, it received a very positive response. I think the big thing with welcoming back volunteers, and the first and foremost concern within Historic Environment Scotland's thoughts, when making all of our resumption plans, has always been and always will remain the safety and well-being of staff, volunteers, visitors, and any contractors that are at our sites. When we looked at re-engaging after the first lockdown, we had our volunteer coordinators contact the volunteers to see who was happy to return, so that we could understand how the individuals were feeling, engage interest, both from the staff's point of view, but also from the volunteers' point of view. And this was vital in mapping out our approach to providing excellent service, whilst also ensuring safety came first. So the images on here, Christine is one of our volunteers in the middle there. She's down at Driver Abbey. And then that is a picture of myself. My previous role was monument manager at Dumbarton Castle, so that's me behind the screen on one of the staircases. So yeah, safety has always been at the forefront of our thoughts. So the first document that we will be able to share with you, and all these documents will be available on the Make Our Mark website if anybody would like to have to get hold of them. But it's our COVID-19 policy and minimum operating standards. I mentioned them just before, and they outline the requirements that must be met before any of our sites were able to reopen, in line with official government guidance, and also during the COVID pandemic. They have been developed from a wide range of sector and industry advice, guidance, and best practice, and they set the benchmark for the safe reopening of sites and resumption of operational activities. The document took effect in June 2020 to support planning for reopening. The policy is reviewed on an ongoing basis to reflect updates to both guidance, legislation, and best practice, but also takes into account any feedback from sites, from visitors, and also we'll take into account any volunteer feedback as well. We're sharing this as a link to where it is on our website, because I've mentioned it's a live document and constantly changing. We were sharing it as a link because then you can access it and it'll be the most up-to-date version. So it's the best way to do it. The second document is a Safely Welcoming Back Volunteers session, designed to be held with volunteers before they return to site or before they return to the role. One aspect of my role at Historic Environment Scotland is being part of the site training team who provide training sessions to our staff in various topics. This document was actually adapted from a version we provided for staff ahead of the return and was extremely well received, so we've adapted it to be able to provide for volunteers. We plan to have all our volunteers attend this session before they return, and it's designed to kind of give them the information and reassurance and help them if they have any doubts, concerns ahead of their return. But most importantly, it just allows for the volunteers to talk and ask questions ahead of coming back. Can be run either digitally or adapted and printed off to have as a face-to-face physical session. It's laid out in a PowerPoint format with notes at the bottom of each slide, so which can easily be pulled out for a Word document. Given most of our volunteer roles are in visitor-facing roles, the subject cover does focus on that aspect, but there are sections that can be pulled out and altered for other roles. In terms of length, should take no more than an hour, hour and a half to go through. Would recommend kind of no more than about 10 people at a time. And then the final document that we can share with you as well is a volunteer reinduction checklist, which is to be used on, or designed to be used on the volunteer's first day back. It is best done kind of on site during a lockdown, although it can be done virtually over the phone if that's found more comfortable. Aimed at ensuring all important information is covered and introducing new roles and procedures to the volunteer to help make them aware of changes on site, such as specific cleaning regimes, where any hand sanitizer cleaning stock is located, site-specific information, things like one-way routes, that sort of a thing. Again, it's adapted from a checklist we actually designed for staff ahead of them returning to site, and has been adapted for volunteers. And it was developed in line with our previously mentioned minimum operating standards. There we go. So that's the end of my session on Historic Environment Scotland planning for the safe return of volunteers. As I mentioned, all of the resources are available on the Make Your Mark website. I'm now going to hand over to Vanessa, the Vice Chair of Heritage Volunteering Group, for a session about planning for a physical return of volunteers.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Rosie, for my introduction. I am sure the Natural History Museum would love to be called the National History Museum. I'm sure some of the other organisations might be a little bit sensitive to that, but Natural History Museum likes to think it's international at the best of times. So that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. That'll go down really well. Thank you again. I am, as Joe has introduced me and Rosie, the Vice Chair of the Heritage Volunteering Group. And as Rosie's mentioned, it started in 2014. We're indeed pleased to be actually part of this process today and working collaboratively with Make Your Mark. It's a great opportunity to be able to share and learn together around what we're doing with our volunteers. And this is very much what I'm just talking about today, is the information that we've got stored on our Heritage Volunteering site. Next slide, Joe, please. Thank you. Joe's my wingman today, so I'm very grateful to him. So thank you very much. So there's our website address. Please feel free to use. All of the resources that I'm about to mention to you are available on there. The echo a lot of what David and Joe have already mentioned about thinking about how you're going to bring your volunteers back to site. The redeployment framework is very much about, it's broken down into 4 sections. It's was initially put together by Matt Hick, our chair of the Heritage Volunteering Group, for the Science Museum, which he's head of volunteering for. And and like as I mentioned, it's in 4 sections. 1, rollover. It's the roles in your organisations, supervisors, are they on furlough, etc. It has been designed obviously for a national museum, but it can be accustomed and adapted quite easily for any organisation at all. Volunteers, what's the team size, age, health, role? Is it still okay to operate that role in its current format? Does it need to be thought about differently? The timetable, how you're going to be bringing your volunteers back as well. We don't want that mad rush to the finish line because everyone's excited to be back, especially as most of the older volunteers are now telling me as well at the Natural History Museum that they have both their jabs, so they've got to be safer than anyone, so they want to get back quickly. So it's actually thinking about how you're actually going to plan for them to come back in again. And it's that remobilisation. Does the role need to change in any shape or form? The considerations as well in the framework about if a volunteer manager is on furlough, about when they are coming back, or if they're on part-time, does it work for the volunteers to be on site at the same time as the volunteer manager will be on site, or does that now conflict in any way with the times that the volunteer manager might be on furlough? And health and safety training, what might be needed, personal protection equipment, and social distancing, helping them to really understand that as well. And again, as you've mentioned already, it's the emotional support. A lot of volunteers have lost potentially some loved ones, or may have actually experienced some sadness in what's actually happened, or experienced COVID themselves. So it's trying to manage that as well. And again, thinking about those of you that might have volunteer managers or supervisors, or those that host and support your volunteers, they may also be feeling that emotional strain of what has actually happened in the last year as well. The idea behind that framework, though, is to make it a live document. Don't just put it in a drawer and forget about it. It really does need to be kept active and kept being looked at as well. The redeployment survey is very much again about actually asking your volunteers some questions. It's a really great survey to adapt again, how volunteers feel about coming back, what their concerns might be, do they feel secure, and if they cannot do the role that they actually had in the organisation for one reason or another, would they be willing to take on another role? Would they like to consider that as well? And how's the comms been? Do they feel that they've been kept in touch? Do they feel that they've actually been kept up to date with what's happening as well? And what could you do better? And you can tailor it again to your requirements as well. And any of the sensitive questions, you may just want to run it past someone with some GDPR knowledge as well, just to make sure how you're managing that information. There is also a short video that explains how to use those two, the framework and the survey, and just to talk you through it as well. But again, it can be customized and utilized, and you can download it as well. Next slide, Joe, please. So there are 3 more documents that you can use on the website, and feel free to use them as well. The volunteer remobilisation survey took the survey, and it was used across members of the HVG that were currently active. A number of staff were actually furloughed at the time, so it covered about 154 different organisations, just to give you an idea of exactly what type of information was coming back and how volunteers were feeling as well. And then the return to the volunteering flowchart was put together by Caroline Chestnut from the Courtauld Institute, and it was actually modelled on the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Professional Development's flowchart for bringing staff back as well. So it was adapted for volunteers as well. Again, another way of actually just asking your volunteers, putting the flowchart forward, giving your volunteers the opportunity to work through it by asking them just yes or no questions, so that they could come to an end result, or whether they felt comfortable and confident about coming back into your organisation. And then the last one is a welcome back training. This video was put together by Nikki Hughes from the University of Cambridge's museum. It's actually quite a useful video if you're actually thinking about welcome. It's great welcome training for potentially volunteers, and how to greet those visitors coming in, thinking about the way to approach it, whereas visitors might be feeling nervous or apprehensive by following a one-way system, or not necessarily feeling comfortable with certain restrictions that might now be in place, especially if they're a regular visitor as well. And she actually does address quite a few things, and I think it's quite useful as well, even as staff, to sometimes actually look at that and actually see what someone else is doing. So really useful little tool that we thought would be useful to be putting on there as well. the Heritage Volunteering Group throughout the COVID lockdown actually ran weekly coffee afternoons to actually help to support volunteer managers as well. And they're now continuing though at monthly, and we also run a series of different masterclasses and training as well, and they will continue. If you'd like to become a member of the HVG, we always welcome new people as well. Please feel free to go to the website. There is a link on there that allows you to sign up, and you'll get notifications around what events are happening and what activities as well. And we're also on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn and YouTube. All of our meetings are usually recorded, just like we're having today, and we actually do link them on our YouTube as well. So any previous coffee mornings that might talk about leadership or strategy, and especially about remobilisation and bringing and engaging volunteers, are on there as well. So feel free to use them. They're for anyone to use to gain from that experience and knowledge of other people around the sector. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jo and Vanessa. That was a really great complementary presentation. So a mixture there of resources to help thinking about planning for the re-engagement, discussing that with your volunteers, all the way through to actually, you know, a volunteer's first day back actually on site and induction and such like. So hopefully there is some useful resources there for organisations if people haven't had that opportunity to think about that yet. But also, of course, if anybody else here in the call has resources that you want to share, then please do pop that in the chat or get in touch with us at Make Your Mark, because we do have a resources page on Make Your Mark and can happily link other useful resources, because this is really about getting that sector community feel and really helping with the knowledge share. Now, we're keen to stay on track, and it's now time for break. So if there is any questions for Jo and Vanessa, please save them up for the general discussion, because we're just keen to keep on track. So we're going to have our break time. Now, break time, as I said at the start, there is going to be some breakout rooms. Now, the breakout rooms are, of course, not compulsory, but we've learned from other digital events that people do quite enjoy having them as if we were in a real conference, wandering around, you know, with our coffee or tea and our shortbread, chatting to people. So you'll see the breakout rooms have appeared at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you wish to do so, we're going to convene back at 11:05 and start again sharp. So either walk away from your computer, of course, but if you want to grab tea or coffee, whatever, come back and join a breakout room. You just hover over, click on the breakouts, and it will bring them up, and you can see the different numbers, and you can join, you can leave a room, join another one. You can see if there's other people in rooms that you want to catch up with. So yeah, absolute freedom to do what you like, and we will see you back here at 11:05. The event team will still be here, so if you have got any questions, please do pop them in the chat. Thank you. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the second part of our event this morning. I hope everybody enjoyed having a break. I certainly enjoyed some really interesting discussions in one of the breakout rooms, and we were just talking about some of the approaches to adaptation in terms of the digital landscapes to keep volunteers engaged with meaningful roles, and then some of the social side of things and how important it is for still having these social events. So I'd like to pass on to our next speaker, and that's Lindsay Marston. Lindsay's going to be talking about micro-volunteering and adapting roles to stay connected. Lindsay's been with the conservation charity Chester Zoo as their volunteer manager for 2 years. She's a member of the North West Heritage Volunteering Group and British and Irish Association of Zoos and Aquariums, of which she is a committee member of the Volunteer Managers Group. Lindsay is also a keen micro-volunteer in her own time, who's been an NHS responder during the pandemic and also participates in community support digital volunteering. So I'll pass over to Lindsay. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much. As you heard, I'm Lindsay and I'm the volunteer manager at Chester Zoo. I'm going to be talking about how we engage volunteers through micro-volunteering during the pandemic and beyond as well. So micro-volunteering is something that has actually fascinated me for some time now, because I think it's something that's really powerful to the world of volunteering. It's a way of overcoming some of the structural barriers that we face with traditional volunteering, and it fits in really well with contemporary lifestyles. It's not that it's a new thing, it's actually been recorded to have been around for many years now. It has become more popular during the lockdown in particular, as many people stayed at home and there was a national call out for volunteers through schemes such as the NHS Responders. And I'm someone that enjoys a little bit of micro-volunteering myself alongside traditional volunteering. So I quite enjoy volunteering that you can do from your phone, because it does fit in around my lifestyle, and I can do it while I'm watching things like Line of Duty as well. I think that the idea that people can make a difference in minutes, that they can make a positive change to an organisation or a charity, and it can make you feel quite good too, is pretty amazing. Micro-volunteering is the action of completing small activities, often without any big commitment or sign up, and you create a really big impact. Because of the multiple ways you can now micro-volunteer with organisations, you could volunteer anywhere at any time. So volunteers are part of the conservation, education and engagement team at Chester Zoo. So we're engaging with up to 250 volunteers every year through various roles and programmes. This includes our youth volunteering schemes, visitor engagement and education volunteering. What Chester Zoo volunteers do is they advocate for wildlife and conservation. They connect people with nature, they empower them to make positive life changes to benefit wildlife home, and unable to return to volunteering in the zoo, that we began to think about how we could utilise the skills of those volunteers for the benefit of our work and keep them connected and engaged with our organisation. Many volunteers felt isolated at home. They contacted us to tell us this. They wanted to know, how could they help us at Chester Zoo? What could they do to make a difference? So we started by introducing the concept of micro-volunteering to other members of the team and the volunteers. We worked together to identify and develop engaging activities that volunteers could do from home that would benefit our work. So one of the most popular activities we introduced was fact-checking interpretation signage for the reopening of one of our big habitats. Volunteers engaged really well with this activity. It involved them researching animals and checking facts such as their IUCN status of their species and other factual information. They really loved this activity because it meant that they could use their skills and their passion for wildlife, and they could learn something brand new at the same time. Another great activity they enjoyed was to identify the tags of learning resources for the website. This involved them reading and reviewing educational content that we put on our Chester Zoo website. This really helped us to ensure that our filtering was working correctly and that people were able to access resources that were relevant to their needs or their development level. We also felt it was essential to provide volunteers with opportunities that they could do offline too. There are some volunteers that just don't enjoy online activities, or they may face digital exclusion. So we included activities such as wildlife monitoring or creating habitats for wildlife. So things like building bird boxes or monitoring native species and recording that information. Anything that would benefit native wildlife in their local area or in their gardens. And this activity was really closely linked to one of our big conservation campaigns, which is Wildlife Connections. So all of the activities that we designed were relatively quick. They were ranging from a few minutes to an hour. Volunteers could sign up to as many or as few micro-volunteering actions as they wanted to, and they could sign up on our volunteer management system. As we were engaging with them weekly through our email comms that we send out to them, they were able to see the micro-volunteering activities as they came up. So volunteers were able to stay connected, and it gave them something that they could focus on during their time at home. And this was really great because we had some volunteers that were comfortable to return to volunteering in the zoo and they were happy to do that. But then you had all these volunteers at home that had this feeling of guilt that they weren't doing something. And we really wanted to mitigate that because there was nothing to feel guilty about. But if there was any way that we could support them, then we were going to do that. So another big project we've been involved with, Hedgehog Watch, is a citizen science project where people use motion sensor cameras to survey wildlife in their back gardens. The project is part of a scientific study to help our scientists to understand habitat features that help hedgehogs to thrive. So our team worked with the field programme staff to shape the volunteering roles and recognise their participation, the participation of the participants as micro-volunteering. The volunteers are managed by the field programme staff, but we've provided them with everything they needed to set up this volunteering opportunity and to use our volunteer management system, Better Impact. We've helped them with volunteer management expertise, and we've helped them to be able to communicate well with their volunteers. This project is ongoing, so we hope to share the progress of it as soon as we can. And also the great thing about this is many of our existing volunteers were able to get involved with this project, and it did give us another way that we could engage with volunteers that were still shielding or spending more time at home. So recognition is something that's really important to us. It shows volunteers just how they can make a difference to our conservation goals, and it helps them to know just how much we appreciate them. We've encouraged our volunteers to register all of their micro-volunteering time on the Better Impact volunteer management system. This has helped us to measure the time they spend on task and provide us with relevant feedback from volunteers for data or for reporting. So we can see that over the past year that 76 volunteers have engaged with micro-volunteering activity, and they've recorded over 500 hours of time over the past year. This doesn't include the Hedgehog Watch activities. We also use our social media channels and Chester Zoo's website to share success from our programmes and raise the profile of volunteering at Chester Zoo. It's important for us to highlight the multiple ways that people can get involved and make a difference, and it also shows our volunteers just how much of an impact they make. Our community hub on the website provides people with a different way that they can share their action for wildlife through stories that they share on the website. So some people have shared what they've done for fundraising for Chester Zoo. They've shared if they've done like a virtual walk, and some people have even shared their Hedgehog Watch experiences as well. And this is another way for them to show exactly what they've done, and by us highlighting those stories, it just helps to raise the profile of this idea of micro actions for the benefit of an organisation. And the last thing we did was we introduced micro-volunteering certificates, and this was to add to our normal portfolio of other certificates that volunteers can achieve when they're volunteering with us at Chester Zoo. We actually gave out these certificates on Micro-Volunteering Day, which is in March every year. And another great thing about the Better Impact system that we use to manage volunteers is that you can use digital badges on there for different achievements. So we've been able to utilise that on the platform to be able to show volunteers just how much of an impact they've made as well. Part of our strategic plan for volunteering, we will continue to develop micro-volunteering and help us to provide different ways that people can contribute to our goals to prevent extinction at Chester Zoo. We know that many people want to get involved with our work. So for us, it's about upscaling that and providing people with different opportunities like campaigning or writing to their MPs or different ways that they can get involved and support our work through micro-volunteering. It has been a great way for us to stay connected to our volunteers, and it really has helped us to show them just how much we value their skills and their commitment at Chester Zoo too. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. It just makes me, before seeing your preview presentation, it just makes me want us all just do a big learning journey immediately down to the zoo to see you. It looks wonderful. And seeing lots of comments there coming through. The thing that's springing to mind is I think we probably need an event maybe that looks at developing micro-volunteering, a bit of a workshop there. We're going to be asking in live polls about future events, but just seeing some of the chat and everything coming through there, I think it's really a topic in its own right. I have a quick question before passing over to Amy that I'd be interested in. I'm not sure how much micro-volunteering you were doing pre-pandemic and then obviously very quickly responded there. Did you have any specific governance barriers looking internally to Chester Zoo that you had to overcome? So for example, in Historic Environment Scotland, we want to do more with digital volunteering and such like, but we have quite a lot of questions and internal discussions about increasing digital access and such like. So it'd be interesting to hear that from your perspective.
So we didn't really do much before. No, we were starting to develop it. We were looking at research into it and sort of looking outward at what other organisations were doing, and we were really keen to get involved. We had this idea that we have a sort of global audience really, and there's so many people that contact us all the time and say, how can we help your work? And that's what the sort of avenue we were going down really. And in fact, the pandemic helped us to test that out with our volunteers, just to see how well it would work, how we would record their time and things like that. I'd say no, we didn't have any governance issues really at all, to be honest with you. I think we've worked well with other teams, so it's not something we could do in isolation, to be honest. We had to work with other teams for them to provide us with the opportunities for volunteers. We had to work with the marketing teams to make sure there was somewhere where they can display this information and sort of recognise volunteers on a sort of a bigger scale as well. And we even had lots of buy-in from the trustees as well. So they've been very incredibly supportive as well. So they've recognised it as a way to keep volunteers engaged. And we are looking at it as a way to be able to help us to reach our mission goals as well.
Great, thank you for that. So I'm going to pass over to Amy Mack now for the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, that's so interesting, Lindsay, and so interesting to hear about from the sort of natural environment, a slightly different sort of angle to heritage, and yeah, how we can sort of learn across different sectors as well. I think people picking up on the fact that it's a really good idea, micro volunteering, and it's just a really nice term, isn't it? It's a nice way to kind of, it's friendly, it's not too much commitment. People are sort of recognizing that they could fit that in amongst their work, their family, or their caring responsibilities. Comments coming through. We had a question from Kiara, who was asking about, she was really interested to find out more about how Chester Zoo captures the time volunteers spent on activities. You're mentioning some sort of digital logging, and then that sort of translates into recognition, etc. So
yeah, we are really lucky. I don't know what that noise is. We are really lucky that we have a volunteer management system platform called Better Impact. And Better Impact enables you to post those opportunities to volunteers. They sign up to them, and through doing that, they can log their hours and their contribution. The great thing about that as well is we're not just looking for the hours that volunteers give. We want their feedback, we want their other data and their other information. So if they're doing wildlife monitoring, for example, we want to know what they've monitored as well. So the Better Impact system has been able to help us to measure all of those different things, and even volunteer satisfaction levels. So we can see how happy volunteers are to do those activities. And that really helps us to think about, do we do similar activities in the future, or was that not a great activity? We won't do that one again, sort of thing. So it's a really great system for that.
Yeah, and it just sort of shows, when other speakers as well and people in the comments bar were talking about all the different ways they've adapted to, involving volunteers, whether it's through the social ways, through, Christmas parties, online quizzes, etc. You've adapted by introducing this micro volunteering. How has it sort of propelled you forward? Do you think you would have ever done this, with under different circumstances, and will you keep doing it going forward and keep going down this route?
Yeah, we were definitely gearing up to doing it, but the pandemic just kind of forced us to do it quicker. The Hedgehog Watch project was something that, it was a project that they may not have recognised it to be micro-volunteering until we were able to support them with our expertise in volunteer management and being able to provide them with a platform for them to be able to do that. So they were always going to do this study, and I think it's about us being able to change the idea of what volunteering is as well. So there is some work that we're doing at the moment with our community projects. So we have people that will come out in their communities and spend their time improving wildlife habitats, or improving things in their local community with our workers, and that is volunteering. So it's about us being able to help our colleagues in Chester Zoo as well to think about the people they're engaging with and helping them to recognise those participants' time as volunteering as well. So it's kind of, for us, it's a bit of a culture change, and we're kind of excited about the future and where it's going to take us as well.
Great. Just seeing there's a question coming from Anne. Is there a definition in time for examples attending a day event? is this micro volunteering? Yeah, so is there a sort of defined period of time that is micro volunteering?
It's definitely debated. It's debated in the sector, to be honest. You can have people that do a beach clean for the day, and that's micro volunteering. You can have someone that signs a survey and shares it on social media, and that's micro volunteering too. So it's about how you shape it as well. It's another great engagement tool, I think. And like I said at the beginning, it's a way of breaking down those formal barriers to volunteering. And I think if you can include people and it helps them feel included and it helps them to feel like volunteers too, then it's a great thing, whether it's an all-day event or if it's just seconds of people's time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all the questions.
I have a question.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I've got a question. Lindsay, so you very quickly adapted, and then I think you said, and sorry, apologies if I got this incorrect, that quite a lot of your existing volunteers started micro volunteering because of the digital environment. Do you have any sense at the moment if some volunteers will just keep with micro volunteering and might not return to pre-pandemic roles, or is it just impossible to know at the moment?
I think it's going to be hybrid, to be honest. So we have got volunteers now that are still doing some micro volunteering, but they're also slowly returning to shadowing shifts with other volunteers. So it's kind of, they still want to keep up that micro volunteering and they still want to be back at the zoo. So the other thing we've had is some volunteers that say, oh, I'm getting my vaccination this week, so I'll miss my shift, but I'll do some micro volunteering. So they're recognising that as another way to make a contribution. And I think going forward, I'm really happy with that, because I'm really keen on sustainable volunteering too. So the idea that you don't have to travel somewhere to volunteer and that you can do it locally to where you are, you can do it at home, you can do it in your community. So for me, it just kind of fits in with this sort of ethos that we have as well. So I'm really happy to continue to provide these opportunities and to work with volunteers and staff members to help us kind of develop this further and just offer what we can to volunteers.
So it sounds like then your plan is that micro volunteering will sort of become a core part of your offer, and it sounds like at Chester Zoo that from every level in the organisation there's complete buy-in and support of volunteering, that it's part of the DNA of your organisation, so to speak. So it sounds, because it makes me think as well about sometimes these things could be such a success then, but the resource challenge that I think most of us have all experienced and do experience as volunteer managers. Do you feel it might put pressure on things? I mean, that's maybe not a question that you want to answer, which is totally understandable, but yeah, it just makes me think about resourcing going forward as well.
I think, you know, there will be some challenges, definitely, but we are lucky to have a great volunteer management system. We also work closely with our local voluntary sector organisation, and they also too have a platform that we can use to utilise and sort of engage volunteers as well. So in terms of that resource, that's fine, really. And I think as well with the website, with the community pages, the hub that we have, there are ways that people can do their micro volunteering time and sort of show what they've done as well. It is important for us to capture that information, but it's not the sort of the end target. The fact that people are doing it is the most important thing. One big thing that we've launched this year at Chester Zoo is our conservation master plan. And one of the things that we're really involved with is the idea that we want to empower 10 million people to live more sustainably for the benefit of wildlife over the next 10 years. So micro volunteering is a way that people can get involved with that really easily, because it gives you an action, it gives you a sort of call to action, and then it's, you know, there's sort of that end product at the end of something that they've sort of done out of that as well. So it's really about connecting people with wildlife, connecting people with nature, connecting people with Chester Zoo, and sort of empowering them as an individual to make a difference as well.
Thank you. Hearing you refer to micro volunteering within the context of sustainable volunteering, really interesting. And again, it makes me think that we need an event maybe about considering and developing sustainable volunteering, because it's obviously not just micro volunteering, but that is a term, especially this year, obviously, as we head towards COP26 at the end of year and the big considerations around climate change and such like. So yeah, it's making me think, get quite excited. So I think this is just really taking us into the general discussion, the panel discussion that we have. So this session that we're going to be having, the general panel, I'll just quickly check my times here. So the plan is to now have an open discussion until 11:50. So our speakers are all going to join us for the panel for this discussion, but we do like this to be as kind of informal and free flowing. So I'm going to remind everybody of who is on the panel, but so please in the chat bar, if you have a question for a specific person, please say that in the chat bar, or if it's just general, please say that. But it's not just exclusive to our panel here. So if somebody asks a question, sorry, someone from the panel responds, please pop it in the chat, you know, or raise your digital hand. You've got the reactions buttons down the bottom as well, and you can also raise your hand, and we'll be having a look out there. Thank you, Lindsay, for the wee heart there. So just to remind you then about the panel members. So we've got Joe Sellors, Tourism and Destination Development Manager from Historic Environment Scotland, who's also on the Make Your Mark Volunteer Organisers Network. Vanessa Theed, Volunteer and Apprenticeship Strategy Manager from the Natural History Museum, I got it right this time, and Vice Chair of Heritage Volunteering Group. David Bell, Assistant Creator from the National Mining Museum Scotland. Lindsay Marston, who we've got here, Volunteer Manager at Chester Zoo. And we're also joined by Ben Marsh, who's the Volunteer Coordinator for Barnsley Museums and member of the Heritage Volunteer Group's EDI Working Group, is also joining the panel. And the questions don't need to be directed specifically about the topics that you've seen the speakers. This is about safely returning volunteers, but we are a community here of people who have a passion and love for volunteerism. We want this to be, you know, a safe and discussion space. So if there is something that you want to ask to do with your volunteer organizing, any challenges that you're having related to the pandemic or anything, please just ask them in this space, because we've got all the right people. Well, obviously we're missing a lot because this isn't everybody, but you know, there's a lot of people on this call with a massive amount of knowledge. So I will pass over to Amy to start the discussion. Thank you.
Hi. So just to follow up on what we were chatting about there with micro-volunteering, Emma was wanting to know more from Vanessa about her Twitter micro-volunteering role that she's mentioned in the chat bar.
Yep, just very briefly, and I'm happy to dig out some details about it a bit more as well, but we have a number of Twitter accounts. The NHM Learn Twitter account is actually now supported by a number of volunteers. Some of the volunteers were still keen to get involved with the museum, and even remotely, and it was really difficult trying to convert a lot of roles, because most of the work that's done by the Natural History Museum needs to be on site, and some of the remote roles require a certain amount of access, which is quite difficult to give without being able to secure it. So, but the beauty of this role was very much about the fact that the volunteers could actually promote all what was happening, and the museum started to do an awful lot of digital online activities, especially around learning and working with schools and different things like that as well. But they wanted another way of helping to promote it and to get it out there, and that's where the Twitter volunteer role came about. Lots of volunteers are active on social media, and we're really keen to sort of pick up anything and then actually start to make sure it got linked to appropriate organisations or either Instagram or Facebook as well, obviously utilising their own personal accounts as well, and it was a personal view. The digital team were involved obviously just to make sure that they were happy with the way that the Twitter volunteers were doing it, but because it was being done under a separate Twitter handle rather than the NHM London, they were more than happy, and it's actually proved really successful. It's brought lots and lots of people in, and the volunteers have been loving it because they're keeping up to date with all what's going on. Was that enough?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really interesting. And yeah, you're right. Every organisation or group will have different policies on social media use, but that's interesting to know that you set up a different handle and that was your workaround, and that's worked well. Oh, Rosie, we've got a question. Do you want to ask your question directly, Rosie?
Yes, I can do. So this isn't really aimed at anyone specifically in the panel, so if someone chimes with them to come forward, please do. I'm interested in evaluation. So in the Historic Environment Scotland, as Joe said, we had to put our programme immediately on hold, and we've done a small amount of digital volunteering, but want to do more on that. But I'm interested in thinking about evaluation. So this could be for the panel or it could be anybody else in the call really. Has evaluation of last year, has anyone been thinking about it? Has anyone been delivering it? Has it been put on hold? Is that just one additional thing to think of that is just a bit much at the moment? So yeah, any thoughts on that would be great.
I might jump in at this point. We had just launched a community history project as part of a conservation area regeneration scheme, which is also a Townscape Heritage funded by the lottery in Inverkeithing in Fife. And so we had to pivot to digital, as the saying goes. And we were really lucky with our consultant team, Gavin McGregor of Northlight Heritage and Tom Turpey of Stirling University. They were just fantastic, and they provided our volunteers with lots of introductory material and then directed them to online resources. And there are just amazing online resources available. There's a Danish archive of shipping that passed from 14 something to 1863 when they abolished the toll. So any shipping that went from Europe into the Baltic had to pay a toll at this point between Sweden and Denmark. So one of our researchers has found new information about shipping that went from Inverkeithing into the Baltic in the 17th and 18th centuries. Amazing and extraordinary. So we managed through Zoom to do all kinds of things, and I'm always got a little bit of an evaluation. How are we doing? Hat in, or noise in my head and hat on. And we had a Christmas party for our volunteers. We got a local cafe in Inverkeithing to make up little bags of party treats, and different volunteers went and collected their party bags from the cafe. But in fact, new friendships had formed, and some people collected other people's bags. And friendships had formed through the project. And at the Christmas party, we invited them all to open and consume their party bags while we were having our party, which they did. I recorded it. It was a Zoom, and we asked them, any thoughts about the year so far, trying to be very unleading in our question. But in fact, the volunteers were so lovely, and they said it had been so meaningful, and they loved the rhythm and the routine, and they loved the contact, and they'd enjoyed developing new skills and finding out new things. And I'll be using those testimonies. I can quote from them. I can share the screenshot. And it hit combating social isolation as well as developing skills for us. And it was just, I would feel very fortunate to have been involved, because our consultants were fantastic. The individuals were fantastic, the information we've discovered, and it fed into other aspects of the project. We found building records about one of the key buildings that's being restored, an A-listed building. So fantastic. And yeah, I think you have to think a little bit out of the box about how you gather the information if you've been able to keep it going. I think we're all very envious of Lindsay's volunteer management system. Sounds great. But yeah, I think it's doable. It's doable.
Thank you. So what you're taking away from that at the moment then is really, at the moment, keep it verbal, kind of keep it verbal and personal and relaxed, because it sounds like you had a really nice open discussion with your volunteers.
Well, it's one of the mechanisms. We also gave them questionnaires and the usual kind of thing. And I think recording, and even recording attendance, I always log for all the meetings that we had. We logged it, and the key outcomes, that kind of thing. But it's just another method, and I think it's very valid, because it does generate quotations and statements and that kind of thing. But even the fact that they were all present and what we'd done to facilitate that, and that it was it was all optional. So it did work very well in that respect.
That actually sounds like a really interesting case study, Emma, and something that with the Make Your Mark with the resources part of the website, we do want to encourage more case studies, etc., as this campaign and project grows. So no pressure at all, and don't have to, of course, Emma, but if you do want to get in touch or anything to have a chat about maybe turning that into a case study to share, then we'd be delighted. And anybody else in the call, again, if you have any great case studies, again, Make Your Mark is about sharing and creating this community. So sorry, I'll pass back to Amy.
Yeah, I suppose just linking into that, a lot of people on the call, the speakers, but also a lot of people in the chat were talking about how they've done surveys, to gauge health and well-being, how volunteers were feeling. Are any of the panel planning to do follow-up at particular times, and will those results be shared? I don't know if Joe or David, if we've got a plan anywhere to do follow-up surveys, just to gauge how volunteers are feeling as we start to reopen and resume, etc.
From our point of view, when we have a date for reopening and we communicate with the volunteers, then I will revisit some of the questions that I've previously asked them. That's as far as our planning's got.
Yeah, probably similar. I know we have had discussions about what Historic Environment Scotland would do when it comes to welcoming volunteers back. Once we know kind of when they're going to be coming back, we probably will go back out and just kind of see what they're thinking, see if anybody's changed. There's been a few changes kind of in sites and things like that in terms of volunteer coordinators and things. So some sites it's not possibly in a position, and also thinking about volunteer roles on sites. Some of them are no longer kind of feasible in terms of how the sites are now being run because of COVID procedures and things like that. So that's something else we'd have to think of, looking at the way the volunteers previously worked. They might have to be adapted. So yeah, I think that's something we probably would go back to.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I'd kind of add to that is obviously one of the big pieces of learning for us has been the ability for a lot of our volunteers to work from home, and so that's going to be another option for us moving forward that we hadn't really given any thought to until the lockdown, and that obviously it fits in with what Vanessa was saying about tweeting, and it fits in with the micro volunteering as well. That I think it's looking on the positive side, it's a way to expand our offer to volunteers and give us different options for how we work with volunteers in the future.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, we at the in March, April, another part of my responsibilities in the Inverkeithing CARS TH is supporting the local history society, many of whom were enrolled in the community research project, and I suggested to them that they might like to do their monthly talks on Zoom, and at that point they were like, oh no. And in fact, by about December, people were just getting more familiar with that. And one of the volunteers said her husband was so missing the football that he had started watching the football at the same time as all his friends, and then they would get together on Zoom at the end, with the backdrop being the pub they used to meet in, and talk about the game, which I thought, now that is a sign that people are adapting and getting more comfortable with this technology. So I re-suggested that we might start a wee talk programme, and they were like, yeah, okay, let's give it a go. So they had they had one a month, and one of the committee members came. Not even all of their committee are on email, so they developed a newsletter and they posted it to the people who weren't on email, and someone joined one of the Zoom talks, and it was her first Zoom experience. So it was so heartening to think people have got more into this technology. It's obviously not inclusive. Not everybody's got the technology, not everybody's got the skills, not everybody's comfortable, but it was so heartening to think that the mindset had changed. So hopefully it's a sign of the potential to do things in a blended way. If people are still feeling unsure for a variety of reasons, which they're very likely to do, it is an option to deliver to people.
Yeah, picking up on that technology question, that digital question, we have a question from Claire from Aberdeen Art Gallery, and she's wondering how some of the speakers or anybody else has handled ICT and remote volunteering. Do volunteers use their own devices, or does anybody provide devices? And then how does that work alongside sort of access requirements as well, if some folders are locked down, etc. And yeah, Debs is also saying that that's her query. How does technology work in terms of costs to the organisation, etc. See, Anne's got her hand up. I don't know if you were waiting because you've got a point to make related to this.
Sorry, because it is kind of in relation to that, and I know, sorry, And I was glad, thank you for saying that we could raise, you know, that weren't necessarily specifically about, but it's applicable to what we're talking about now. And for those that have maybe met in the coffee sessions and things before HPG, they'll be tired of me saying that, you know, I'm the one in all of you all who have a large, you know, have had existing volunteers, because in Renfrewshire we're shut for regeneration, and so didn't have the you know, the venue open and very restricted in that pre-pandemic, but introducing a new program of volunteering. So under the then hit of course with the pandemic, so I didn't have the group of volunteers to maintain that contact with throughout, you know, but it was then thinking, well, how can we get some activity, how can we do this? So ours is all virtual, albeit quite a small group, but it's all virtual, and the intention is to remain so for some time. But what I wanted to ask, well, I've got all you experts here in the sector now, one of the barriers that I am sort of facing now is, as we get into sort of, if you like, more involved roles, we do have volunteers transcribing for us, and they've been doing fantastic work. And what we've done there is literally the documents have been emailed out to them, and you know, and they return them to myself and so on. But it's becoming a little bit more complex now. We're looking at a couple of roles, and we have curators raising the fact that they have concerns about us sharing documents, you know, and sensitive information. So that's what I wanted to ask for those that had been doing it. Now, I know it's happened elsewhere. There's been projects where a whole collections have been digitised via volunteers, and a large project down south, and you know, and this is us now, but it's becoming a bit of a barrier. And I want to know, and obviously I have written up in terms of, I have confidentiality statements, and you know, and a whole lot of things written into our volunteer handbook. But do any of you have that sort of, you know, the team are worried about, you know, historic documents going out, you know, out with our, I mean, we're looking at, there's possibility of providing laptops that are part of the organisation, and so therefore they would have access to internal folders, so that brings a whole raft of things. Do any of you have that at the moment, and how are you sort of mitigating for that?
I can come on and give a quick example from Historic Environment Scotland's perspective. So we have done a wee bit of recruitment with remotely managed volunteers over the past year, and so we have this sort of standard data management clauses that we had before, but we now have introduced sign-offs where they're talking about sensitive information, etc., and agreed standards relating to that. There's also like a GDPR essentials training course that they have to do, and then they have to sign and return the same waivers that staff would have to. We have basic disclosures that all volunteers would have to go through. So we're basically moving on to a system, and it's a wee bit data heavy from an audience perspective, but now any volunteer that would have access to those networks or hardware would go through the same criteria process as our staff would, but we are able to lock access to certain parts of our networks, and if we've got archive databases and such, like collections databases, we can lock down access into only the parts that they need to see, rather than kind of allowing access and the sort of tentacles into the other one. So that's an approach that we're taking. I saw someone asked about insurance and risk assessments as well. We haven't had changes in our insurance, but absolutely our risk assessments before any re-engagement of activity, we go back to the pre-COVID risk assessments and adapt them. And if anyone's interested, our minimum operating standards that Joe had talked about, that talks about that kind of process and thinking those changes through. But I'll pass over to anyone else as well that can come in.
I think one of the benefits for us has been similar to you, you know, really thorough risk assessments, but also kind of you know, using the knowledge in the sector as well. So NCVO have been a great resource. The National Youth Agency, because we were engaged with young volunteers within our projects. And obviously there's kind of different rules for safely engaging young people as well. So we looked out into the sector to see kind of what the best practice was. So that was locally, that was nationally, and that was with, you know, those sort of big agencies as well. And we listened to our volunteers too. So we were getting constant feedback from our volunteers about what was working and what wasn't working, you know, out in the zoo and things like that as well. And I think it has been just a really sort of reactive process the whole way through. So I think that you have to sort of take that approach. It's been a sort of very ever-changing situation, hasn't it, really, over the past year. So I think that's kind of the approach that we've taken at Chester Zoo.
Yeah, and that's again, it's coming through in the comments. People are, you know, using different approaches. Some people using Google Drive, Dropbox, SharePoint, and then also others recognizing that there's, you know, it is you know, the digital divide is an issue in terms of people using their own devices as well. There's a question from Laura who's interested to hear about the different experiences related to age groups across the panel. So whether that's different age groups returning, or how you're engaging with them. Don't know if MD's got any reflections on that.
One of the things that we're currently looking at the Natural History Museum, for an example, is the fact that a number of our older volunteers have actually put forward that they don't necessarily feel that they might be quite as capable as they were previously. And therefore what we're actually doing is looking at it from a health and safety point of view, because it's one thing that that some of them are very eager because they've had their 2 injections and they feel more than capable of coming back. But some of them have actually felt that because of the lockdown that they've become less active, and also they've not necessarily always had the interaction that they had before. Therefore they're feeling mentally that they might be struggling to actually cope at the same level that they had previously. So we are actually talking to them and discussing with them as to what we can do to phase them in, so they can come back on when they can come back on site. Volunteers aren't back on site at the moment, but they could come back on site, and we can actually adjust their roles if necessary, or their hours, and just take it a step at a time, so that we can deal with that as well. We've actually increased the number of mental health first aiders across the museum as well. I'm one of them too, and we've actually offered that service out to our volunteers as well, and that's actually created quite a few conversations as well to try and help deal with that nervousness that some of our older volunteers are feeling about coming back, and if they feel capable as well.
Yeah, that was something in a private message that came through. Somebody was reflecting on that we're in a funny time at the moment with some people having vaccinations and others not, and at the moment older people are getting the vaccinations, but actually maybe younger people are feeling a bit vulnerable because they've not had it, and yeah, there's definitely a balance to strike there. Don't know if anybody else wants to talk on different age group experiences, or I'll move on.
I was just going to say one reflection I've had thinking about younger people really is really starting to see that want to volunteer from a skills perspective, and kind of wanting to catch up, if you like, on what has been a year kind of missed when it comes to opportunities. So I think you're right, Amy. I think there is a little bit of concern around they've not been vaccinated yet necessarily. But I think there's also that kind of balance about how much longer can they put off gathering opportunity, getting their CVs built up, preparing their UCAS applications, etc., etc. So we are starting to see that, and I think we just have to be mindful about how we balance that group, I guess, and support them in whatever way we can.
Mm-hmm. Very quick question from Yila Barry, who's asking about experience of updating risk assessments. And if the MD's got any pointers on that, or where to direct Yila to for maybe some advice.
I think Rosie kind of mentioned from Historic Environment Scotland. So we did an awful lot of work when staff returned to site on all of our risk assessments. And you know, it was kind of done in line with our minimum operating standards, which we've mentioned quite a few times today. So we kind of linked in and used those and kind of adapted depending on government guidance and that sort of thing. And while we haven't welcomed back volunteers at the moment, that's kind of what we'll be using to kind of adapt our existing risk assessments to kind of make sure that they are up to scratch. But also, some of the volunteer risk assessments actually did come in useful for when staff did return. So previous role at Dumbarton, they changed the way that Dumbarton Castle actually kind of worked in terms of ticketing. So instead of selling tickets and letting visitors wander, we've done as a steward-led pass. The steward's actually taken them round. And we kind of used one of the risk assessments we had there from volunteers being guided pause. So it helped us draw up a new risk assessment for staff to be able to do these steward-led pause. It's not guided tours, steward-led, so it's a different kind of role. But we had the sort of the base there to be able to kind of work from, make sure that we were following the right standards.
Great. I think that's our question time up. I'm conscious there's a couple we haven't managed to ask, but we should maybe move on. Rosie?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Yeah, it's the thing about these, yeah, we did think, should we make the event 12, finish at 12 or 12:30, and we thought, oh, 12 will be enough, and then you come to the end of the events and we're still discussing things. So again, nice to reflect on for our next event. Just to pick up Isla on the point about risk assessments in those discussions, I think I'm not sure if you're a member of the Make Your Mark Volunteer Organisers Network. So Make Your Mark, the wider participation campaign, and then there is the network, which is a peer support network that people can join. And the sort of questions that you had there that we've been discussing, they can be directed to the network because that's a peer support network of volunteer managers, and people can help and respond with questions and such like. So it might be a good idea to sort of take that conversation offline there. So before we finish, we want to do a quick poll session. And the poll sessions run very quickly. Generally speaking, they go smoothly. So Rosie B, our tech extraordinaire, is going to be running the polls. So they will basically pop up, automatically appear on your screen, and then you'll be given time to consider your answer, and then you will select your answer, and then the polls will automatically close again and summarize, so we all see the results, sharing them together. So I will pass over to Rosie for the polls. There we go. So we've got a practice poll to do first, folks. Okay, so if you just want to give your answers. There was a bit of debate when we were looking at this. I thought I was a Jaffa cake. Somebody else thought I'd be a cheesecake. So, you know, interesting to know what's going on in everybody's minds right now. Okay. So what do we think there? A Victoria sponge and a carrot cake seem to be the most popular ones. We do this at the start of other events, so we'll compare the results. So we'll have the next one. Okay, so this next one is about, please pick your top 5 preferences for topics for future volunteer, for future Make Your Mark knowledge share events to support volunteer managers. So this is a multiple choice. Please pick your top 5 and do scroll down, use your mouse to scroll down, just not all choices are there. So do we have attracting a diverse volunteer audience, very popular, developing skills and talents of volunteers, engaging volunteers to champion the pressing issues of our time? I can't quite see the result there on the bottom of my screen. Okay, attracting a diverse audience, developing skills and talents of volunteers, leading ones there, and recruiting young people. Quite a good balance, understanding, adapting to the new normal. Okay, thank you. Then our next one is about, please pick your top 5 preferences for topics for future volunteer involving events.
Rosie, I don't know if it's just my computer, but I'm having trouble picking 5. It seems to be a radio button where you can only pick 1 at a time, and when you click on the next one, I don't know if anybody else is having that. It might be just me.
No, it looks like people are saying the same. Okay, so it looks like we're picking our top one, our top one for this one. Thank you, Andrew, for that. So, using volunteering to develop skills and talents, introduction to popular heritage volunteering topics. Great, thank you. So I think that is all of our polls. Oh no, we've got one more about type of event preference going forward. And this is just select one only. So it's about when safe to do so, people's preferences, digital events, physical events, and a blended approach. And this will just allow us to consider how we focus our resources. Okay, so I think it's quite clear there, a blended approach. Great, thank you everyone there for taking the time to fill in our polling. Always nice to have a little bit of live evaluation. Now, I'm conscious that it's 1 minute to 12, so if people need to leave sharp on 12, then obviously please do so. I'm just about to give the concluding remarks now and some information about joining Make Your Mark and HVG. So if you do need to leave now, thank you so much for joining us today. So thank you for a great morning of discussion. Yet again, this event where we are hearing shared themes around organisational and community resilience, adaptation, collaboration, support, and quite frankly, a love for each other and volunteering. I've always reflected, and when we're talking about these topics and throughout this event, that we're really fortunate, I think, to have the kind of shared passion that comes with volunteerism to help us all in this extraordinary time. Now, if you have enjoyed today's Knowledge Share event, it's the second one of a series. The next event is about recruiting local volunteers. That's on the 1st of June from 2 till 3, and that will be led by the Volunteer Organisers Network. We've got a big Volunteers Week pub quiz on the 5th of June from 12 till 1:30. That's the first time that we're putting on an event that is a social event. That is for both volunteers and for volunteer managers. So that's in partnership with the Eden Project Big Lunch. So that's about just coming along and having fun all together, volunteer managers and volunteers in together. So please go to the Make Your Mark website, find out those details and share that with your volunteers, because we really want to get as many people together as possible. 8th of June, there is Addressing Inequality in Heritage, and that's in partnership with the Heritage Trust Network. HVG, they have a number of events coming up. The Volunteer Leader of the Year Award, closing date is Friday the 28th of May, so there's still time to take part in that. Wednesday 26th of May, they've got one of their masterclasses, Ethics in Volunteering. Tuesday 1st of June, Creating Capacity Report launch. 8th of June, they have one of their coffee afternoons, and then on the 6th and 7th of July, their HVG conference, and there's some more events that you can find out about and how to join HVG on their website. So I just want to finish off by telling you about Make Your Mark, just so you can find out more if you are interested in joining. So the Make Your Mark campaign aims to increase the number and diversity of heritage volunteers in Scotland. Our goal is to encourage the heritage sector to take a lead on inclusive volunteering practice and experiences. Any Scottish heritage organisation who works with volunteers or would like to begin working with volunteers can join Make Your Mark. So we described a wide definition of heritage, including public, private, charitable, and all entities are welcome. Joining Make Your Mark campaign is an act of solidarity that signals your commitment to readdressing social inequalities by building stronger communities through volunteering. We want to empower Scotland's diverse communities by making heritage volunteering experiences and their associated social, economic, health and wellbeing benefits more accessible to all. So to become part of Make Your Mark, an organisation must read our campaign manifesto and sign our expression of commitment to signal its dedication to inclusive volunteering. So you can find out the manifesto and a quick and easy to use web sign up at the Make Your Mark website, which will be added to the chat. And at the moment, we have 38 members and we're growing this new community. This is a new initiative. We're also absolutely open to collaborations and partnerships, such as what we had with the Heritage Volunteering Group today. And there's also opportunities to join working groups. If you've really enjoyed this event, maybe you want to be part of an event team with us. Join Make Your Mark is the first step. Get in touch, because we absolutely welcome people to get behind the scenes with us, as well as benefiting from this wider initiative. So we really do want to hear from you. So I hope you have enjoyed this event, and I'd like to thank everyone who's made this happen. Our incredible speakers, Friends of Dundonald Castle, David, Joe, Vanessa, Lindsay and Ben for coming along and joining our panel. Our amazing BSL interpreters, Lisa and Jill. My fellow event team members, Joe, Amy, Vanessa, Erin, Catherine, David, and our Community Connections Forum tech extraordinaire, Rosie B, behind the scenes. Now, as I've said, a recording of today will be uploaded to the Make Your Mark website, and a digital feedback form that will take 5 minutes will be emailed after this event. It'd be great appreciated if you could take the time to complete that, just so we'll know if you do in fact want us to deliver more events. So on that note, I will say thank you, and hopefully see you all soon.